In the early years, our story was simple. No fairy tales, no grand promises under the stars. Just two young souls, full of hope, full of dreams, trying to make love survive through the exhaustion and the unpaid bills. I remember our first home. Small, damp, with peeling walls and a floor that creaked with every step. But it was ours. It was where he would pull me into his arms and dance with me, even when there was no music. It was where we shared thin soups, threadbare blankets. Laughter over nothing at all. He used to say I was his fortress, and I believed him. I believed everything he told me, the way someone clutches hope with both hands. Time passed. Bills piled up, children arrived, first one, then another, and with the midnight cries came the absences, the overtime hours, the weight that grew heavier, not just on my shoulders but inside my heart. I thought it was normal. That love meant carrying without complaining. That marriage meant enduring without questioning. For years, I smiled in the photos he proudly framed, photos of achievements that bore his fingerprints, but my sweat. And every night, when he collapsed, into bed without a word, turning his back to me, I would whisper to myself, "It's just a phase. It'll pass." But the phase became the routine, and the routine became life. He never asked how many nights I stayed awake, waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. Never noticed how I pretended to sleep, so he wouldn't see the fear shadowing my face when the night dragged too long. The little sacrifices, the ones no one talks about, became my silent prayer. I woke before sunrise every day, brewed his coffee the way he liked, strong, almost bitter, and left it waiting on the table, even when he began stopping elsewhere on his way to work. I folded his shirts with trembling hands, smoothing every crease like I was trying to hold on to time. I picked out gifts he never noticed. Saved newspaper clippings of his minor achievements, even when he left them forgotten on the counter. Paid late fees on bills he misplaced, scheduled appointments he forgot. I was the backdrop to his victories, the invisible thread sewing his life together. I became the hand fixing his collar before meetings. The faint smile at family dinners, even when exhaustion gripped my bones. The sticky note on the door saying, "Good luck today," in my careful handwriting. He didn't see me. Not because I wasn't enough, but because I was constant, like a lamppost at the end of a street, always there, always shining, until someone decides it's too dull and needs replacing. I can't pinpoint the exact moment he stopped truly seeing me. Maybe it was a dinner where he barely spoke, or a birthday forgotten, or a trip he booked without even asking if I wanted to go. Looking back, I realize now, goodbyes don't happen all at once. They start in the small things. And I had been saying goodbye to him for years, without knowing it. At first it was subtle, the way he tossed his keys on the table without looking at me, the way his eyes lit up at a text message, but dimmed when they met mine. He started leaving the house more often, first for work, then for errands, then without explanation at all. Sometimes, when he came home late, he smelled of a cologne I didn't recognize, not the one I carefully picked out for him on a Christmas we could barely afford. It was something new, something sharp, something that didn't belong to us. He grew more impatient. He grew more distant. On his birthday, I bought him a rare book he'd once mentioned, something he had long forgotten. I wrapped it with care, attached a handwritten note. He opened it distractedly, barely glanced at it, mumbled a "thanks, babe," and went right back to scrolling through his phone. That night, as I scrubbed the dishes one by one, I realized I wasn't his partner anymore. I was background noise. The house grew colder, even in the heart of summer. Our conversations became shallow. Our kisses turned mechanical. And deep inside, a question began to whisper. If I disappeared tomorrow, would he miss me, or just miss the things I did for him? It was an ordinary Tuesday. I made lasagna, his favorite, thick with layers of cheese and sauce, seasoned exactly the way he liked. I lit candles, not because it was a special night, but because I still believed small gestures could rebuild bridges. He came home late, didn't apologize, dropped his keys, shrugged off his jacket, and sat down like the meal was an inconvenience. I sat across from him, a tight smile frozen on my face, waiting for a tenderness that never came. He poked at the lasagna without taking a bite, looked up at me with unfamiliar eyes and said, "I just think you're getting a little too old for me." Just like that. No hesitation, no softness, as if time, as if loyalty were crimes I had committed against him. For a moment, the world went silent. I watched his lips moving, offering hollow justifications about needing more excitement, about finding himself again. But I didn't hear a thing. Only felt the crumbling of a life I had built with my own hands. My fork clattered onto the plate, the sound exploding into the heavy air. He didn't flinch. Maybe he expected me to cry, to scream, to beg. But instead, I stood up, picked up my handbag, and walked away, without a word, without a glance back. That night, I wasn't the woman being left behind. I was the woman finally waking up. The house felt bigger that night. Every room echoed with an absence, not of his body, but of everything I thought we had built. The plate of untouched lasagna still sat on the table. The candles burned low, dripping wax onto the tablecloth, silent witnesses to the invisible collapse of a life. I sat on the sofa without turning on the lights, letting the darkness wrap itself around me like a heavy coat. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock, marking seconds that felt heavier than any weight I had ever carried. My hand rested instinctively on the armrest, as if reaching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing, no promises, no future. My phone buzzed on the counter, messages from old friends asking about life, birthday notifications from acquaintances who had long since faded from my world. I didn't reach for it. There was no way to explain this emptiness. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the realization that somewhere along the way I had disappeared inside my own life. I slowly stood and began extinguishing the candles, one by one. Each small flame I snuffed out felt like releasing another piece of a dream I had carried alone for too long. In the bathroom, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A woman stared back at me, not worn by time, but weathered by neglect. By all the birthdays spent alone, by all the apologies that never came, by all the hope swallowed in silence, I traced a wrinkle near my eye, one no camera had ever captured, but one that carried entire lifetimes in its lines. It wasn't just him who left that night. It was the version of myself who thought being invisible was the price of being loved, and somewhere in that heavy, stretching silence, a spark flickered. Small, fragile, but real. The spark of someone realizing that what felt like emptiness was actually space. Space to rebuild. Space to exist without permission. The next morning, the house felt suspended in time. The scent of lasagna still hung heavy in the air, a stubborn reminder of what had crumbled the night before. I hadn't slept. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed or broken anything. Instead, I had sat through the night at the kitchen table, hands folded quietly in my lap, listening to the ticking clock and the steady organizing of my own thoughts, for the first time in years. When the first light crept through the threadbare curtains, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Without hesitation, I opened the old laptop, the one we used for paying bills and booking vacations he always canceled at the last minute. I typed in the name of the airline. My fingers didn't tremble. My heart beat slow and steady, like the heart of someone who had decided she would no longer be left behind. I searched for his favorite destination, the place he always said he would explore someday, always. With a tone that didn't include me, and I booked a ticket, one way, no return. I closed the laptop gently, like sealing a letter to a past life. Then I walked upstairs and pulled a battered suitcase from the closet. The same suitcase I once packed for our honeymoon 3 decades ago. Funny how objects carry memories we don't always expect. I packed his things carefully, the shirts I had ironed for years, the ties I had picked out for his promotions, the cologne that now turned my stomach. I folded them neatly, as if laying to rest something sacred. On top of the suitcase, I placed an envelope. Inside, the printed ticket and a single line written in my own hand. You wanted adventure. Here's your chance. Good luck. I left the suitcase by the door, changed the locks, and locked the door, both the one to our home and the one to my heart. No drama, no announcements, no audience, because sometimes the most devastating strength is the one that makes no sound at all, the strength that simply closes the door and never looks back. The first days felt strange. The house, once so full of hollow absences, was now deliberately empty. No rushed footsteps in the hallway, no clattering dishes, no muffled arguments behind closed doors. Just silence. And for the first time, in a long time, that silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. I started small. I replaced the curtains in the living room. The old ones, the ones he insisted matched the couch, were donated without a second thought. I chose new ones, sun yellow, bright, cheerful, my favorite color, though I had almost forgotten it. Then came the armchair, the one I had always wanted, but he said was too expensive. I bought it, without asking, without apologizing. It arrived on a rainy morning. I placed it in front of the big window, where I could sit and watch the world drift by without needing anyone's permission. I curled into it that afternoon, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not for what I had lost, but for everything I had abandoned inside myself. The next small victories came slowly. I went to the market alone, then the bookstore, then the little farmer's market on Sunday mornings. The first time I sat alone at a cafe, my hands shook. My heart raced. I felt exposed, like the world could see the cracks stitched beneath my skin. But no one stared. No one judged. And with each sip of coffee, with each quiet moment turning the page of a book I chose for myself, a thread inside me stitched back together. I met Mrs. Elvira, the kind old woman who sold flowers at the corner stand. I met Anna, the bright-eyed girl at the bookstore who always recommended novels about women who found their way back to themselves. I accepted invitations, small concerts at the park, cooking classes, book clubs. At first, I stood on the edges, unsure, silent, but little by little, I moved closer to the center, and somewhere between laughter at a table full of strangers and the warmth of a sunny afternoon spent alone, I realized I was breathing again. Not borrowed breath, not silent gasps behind someone else's dreams. My own air, my own life. The months passed, the seasons changed. The roses in the garden, the ones he never noticed, bloomed boldly, without apology. Just like me. One afternoon, while reorganizing the closet, I found an old box. Inside, faded photographs, yellowed love notes, echoes of a woman who once believed she had to disappear to be loved. I held a photograph from our early days. He was smiling at the camera, I was smiling at him. Looking at that young girl, I finally understood. I wasn't mourning what I lost. I was saying goodbye to the version of myself that thought survival meant silence. I placed the photo back into the box, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, but out of gratitude, for the strength she didn't know she was building with every unthanked meal, every unseen sacrifice, every whispered prayer for love that never returned. Later that day, I stood in front of the mirror. The reflection that met me wasn't worn. It wasn't too old. It was seasoned. It was the face of a woman who had walked through fire and didn't just survive. She became the fire. The silver strands in my hair were not signs of weakness. They were battle ribbons. They were proof. The wrinkles around my eyes weren't flaws. They were the road maps of a journey few had the courage to travel. And for the first time, I didn't trace them with sadness. I traced them with pride. He had left. But he had only taken what was never essential: the excuses, the indifference, the hollow echoes of a life lived half awake. What remained, what always remained, was my resilience, my dignity, my freedom. Now, every morning, I sit in my yellow armchair by the window, a cup of coffee in my hands, a book open on my lap, the sun warming my face like a silent blessing, and I know I was never too old to be loved. I was never obsolete. I was never disposable. I was, and I am, eternal and that no one could ever take from me again.